Hello and happy Friday. Liz here, filling in for Senator McMorrow. So there will not be a legislative update this week, but we will have an opportunity, if there are any questions at the end, to ask Jeremy of Affirmations. So today we have a special coffee hour with Affirmations out of Ferndale. So they serve Ferndale and the surrounding community, Oakland County. And we are very, very fortunate to have them on our coffee hour today to talk about pride and what pride is and why we celebrate pride. So, Jeremy, I will let you introduce yourself and Affirmations.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Merklinger, he, him pronouns. I'm the finance director at Affirmations. I've been there about a year and a half. Affirmations is the LGBTQ plus community center on 9 Mile in Ferndale. We do all kinds of things to work with the community. We have a behavioral health program where we hired our first full-time therapist last fall. And then we now have 3 full-time therapists and a full-time case manager. We see about over 50 people every week, which is amazing. And we also have a youth program that helps about 60 kids. They go through a program of leadership and development. So they learn how to do all kinds of different things. And there's about 60 of them a year. We also have a training program where we have a full-time trainer now who goes out into different businesses and educates people on LGBTQ issues. So if anybody's interested in that for their company, or if you work at a public school or a library or anything like that, we do trainings as well. We have all kinds of groups. I think we have over 25 groups right now that meet regularly, support groups, NA groups. We have one of our largest is a senior group. It's a social group. We also have a COVID program right now to help spread the word and educate about COVID vaccines. And we have 2 full-time people who do that, and they go all over the state. And they're going to be at most of the prides throughout the state. So it's kind of it's a really cool program. That's pretty much, that's like the overview of all of our programming right now.
Yeah.
We've grown so much since I've been here, which is really amazing.
That's very exciting. Yeah, usually I'm behind the scenes with Sarah McMorrow, and I would be, dropping all the links to this, but I will leave more information on Affirmations and all the resources and services you guys provide in our comments after we are done recording today. But yeah, we're just going to have a casual conversation today about what Pride is. And as I hope everyone knows that is tuning in, June is Pride Month. So we have Affirmations here to talk more about that and kind of educate us on some different aspects. But I'll start off with the very, broad question of what is Pride?
Pride means a lot of different things to different people, but I believe it's mostly about visibility. Because a lot of times people who are LGBTQ were invisible in a way, because it's not the same as race or ethnicity where it's a visual thing. A lot of times you wouldn't even know that someone around you is LGBTQ plus. So I mean, Pride actually started off as a political thing, and like it was because we were being oppressed as a minority. It all started in a big part of it started in New York, where people were being harassed by the police and arrested just for being who they are. And people got sick of it. And it was in '69, I believe, that there was an uprising in New York, in Greenwich Village, at the Stonewall Inn, which is a gay club. And the police did a raid again, and like people started getting angry and started throwing rocks and stuff at the police, and like said enough is enough. And that kind of lit a spark that just kind of spread across the country. And I also want to say that like it was drag queens and gay men of color that were really influential in this beginning process, because I think that a lot of times those those people were more targeted because of multiple things. I mean, when you're talking about cross-dressing or being transgender or drag queens, it's sometimes very visible, and so you can be harassed in a much more violent way.
Yeah.
Um, and then on top of that, like people of color in general are just treated horribly in this country. And when you add into it another minority back in the 60s, which was illegal to be openly gay or um, transgender or dress in the opposite gender's clothes, like they just got sick of it and decided like enough is enough. And that's kind of how it started. And it just was like a tinderbox waiting to be exploded, and it did, which was really cool. And then it just kind of spread around the country.
Yeah. Um, so I guess, there's everyone can look at pride photos and everything and show everyone having an outstanding time. But I think we need to talk about the deeper aspects of why we still celebrate pride today and have these fun events that are fun, but also incredibly important to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, so I grew up in Michigan, um, out in Grass Lake, which is between Ann Arbor and Jackson, out in the
Mhm.
country. And, I didn't know anyone else who was gay. I grew up in a very, very conservative religious community and only had connections with those people. And I knew no one else who was gay. And when I finally came out, the fact that I could go somewhere and see other people who are like me, being open and honest and proud of who they are, it really made a huge difference in my life on a personal level, because it was the first time I felt like I could be me in public and be accepted and have a community around me to support me, even though they didn't know me, and even though like we would may never even interact again, but just having that camaraderie uh, around makes a huge difference. And I think, a lot of people feel that even today, like, oh, everything is fine. We have gay marriage. We have, some semblance of equality. It's not necessarily enough. Like, we do feel invisible at times. I mean, yes, I have long hair and wear makeup, but, if I just had a short haircut and I mean, I could just look like any other dude on the street. And nobody would know. And if you aren't necessarily okay with yourself yet, if you're struggling with your sexuality, like having a visible physical thing that you can go to and feel okay is super important.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Not to get too cheesy, but just be super proud of who you are in this space and proud that you exist and are yourself and can be who you want to be. Um,
absolutely. I
so
think
it's
that's
just,
where we got pride from. Like, you should
yeah,
be proud.
we should be proud. Yeah, it's just, I think it's a wonderful time to celebrate your most inner self and the most true version of yourself. And it's a wonderful and welcoming space.
Yeah.
So I think like that's incredibly important to include. But I didn't know if there were any, maybe shifting the conversation for just a little second,
Yes.
any prominent movers or shakers or people in Michigan's history, any notable LGBTQ individuals that we should talk about, just as a historical aspect here.
Yeah, I mean, one that comes to mind immediately is Jim Toy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I actually was in Ann Arbor for about 15 years after I came out, and I was on the board of directors of what's now called the Jim Toy Center.
Mm-hmm.
I was the president for 3 years, and like I was very involved. When I came out, I lost my entire community because I grew up super religious, and the community center was how I rebuilt a community around me that helped me feel okay about who I was, which leads into the pride talk as well. But Jim Toy was such an influential person in my life, and he was one of the first people. I think it was in 1970 that he was the first person to publicly come out in the state of Michigan. And he helped to found some of the gay liberation fronts, like there was one in Ann Arbor, and I believe there's in Detroit as well. um, he really, like, I don't think people realize how much he changed the LGBTQ movement across the country.
Hmm.
But without some of his actions in the early 70s, like there wouldn't be a lot of the things that we have now,
Hmm.
because it helped to inspire other people around the country to do the same thing. Um, he founded the first LGBT center at a university at U of M, and back then I think it was called like the Gay and Lesbian Center or something like that. Um, but he passed away in January, I believe. Yeah, January. Um, but he was so influential in so many people's lives, and I think that it's definitely worth keeping his name up there when we talk about people who made an influence in the Michigan uh, state of how we are able to celebrate Pride.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I looked up Kathy, and I'm gonna butcher her last name, Kathy Kazachenko, I believe. She was the first openly gay person to be elected to public office,
Awesome.
and it was for Ann Arbor City Council back in 1974. And
Wow. Yeah. And I'll make sure to include information on both of them too. Yeah.
yeah, and then another one that I didn't get a lot of information on, but Joseph Stewart James. He was a longtime activist in the Detroit community,
Hmm.
um, and he basically, I believe, because of him, and don't quote me on this because I'm not a historian, but I think because of him, we now have Hotter Than July. He was very influential in that. I think it was called the Detroit Black Gay Pride first.
Okay.
Yeah, and he was very influential in helping um, the people of color who happen to be queer or LGBTQ in a lot of different ways. There wasn't a lot of information, but I know that he was very influential just from people I've talked to now.
Yeah.
So those are a few of the people that I looked up and thought about because, well, I mean, Jim Toy, I had a personal relationship with him. Um, he was so cool. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I'll make sure to leave more information on that after we're done here. But I guess going back to the very basics of things, what does LGBTQ plus stand for?
Oh, sure. Yeah. It's a very good question. LGBTQ plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and then plus there's a lot of different identities that come under our umbrella of the rainbow flag. Um,
Hmm.
there are a lot of people out there that don't even realize that there are more than lesbians and gays, and I think now people who are transgender are a lot more people are a lot more aware of that as well.
Hmm.
But there's people who are questioning their sexuality. There are people who are intersex and asexual. In the Native American community, there's the Two Spirits, and I think there's so many different people under one umbrella that sometimes it gets overwhelming to people who are not in the community to even wrap their head around it. But it started as lesbians and gays just wanting gay men wanting um, to be seen and be told that it was okay to be gay and not criminalized. And I think that the transgender community is now in a place where they're more visible, and I think that they're being attacked because they're more visible. And I think it's super important for people, not just in the LGBTQ community, but allies, straight people can be vocal about their support for someone because I personally don't understand, and maybe it's because I am a gay man, but why it matters to anyone, what, who, and what we choose to do behind closed doors. Um, I don't get it. Like, I'm not coming after anyone for what they believe that they're allowed to do what they want as long as they're not hurting people. And I think it's kind of it's very hypocritical of people who are judgmental and especially do it in a context of religious base. I'm a little biased because I grew up in that kind of culture, and
No, I mean, I am very much here for you, sharing your own personal experience and story. Yeah, I don't understand why anyone would disapprove of two consenting adults loving each other, but
Yeah.
that's me. um, so on that topic as well, pronouns I think have become a lot more visible in the conversation in the last maybe decade, 5 years, 2 years, even at
Yeah.
that, talking about pronouns. And we obviously are, sharing ours here today. But what is the importance of you and I and other people sharing their pronouns and making that more a part of our conversations day to day?
Yeah, I think that's really great. And, this is like, I'm 45 this year. And so this has not always been the way it was. And I think that we're all needing to understand that we need to evolve with things that change. And pronouns are very important to people because of the fact that you may you may not present how you are, and there are many reasons for that. Some of it is fear, some of it is acceptance, but I think it's very important to be aware that it's not as complicated as people think it is. As far as like, it doesn't hurt me to use pronouns that people prefer. Um, you know, Here's an example. Uh, my real legal name is Jeremiah, but I go by Jeremy, and it doesn't hurt anyone to call me Jeremy. Well, maybe my parents, but
Same. I'm Elizabeth, and my parents are always like, we didn't name you Liz."
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think of it in the same way when it comes to being aware and using pronouns that people prefer and choose. Because some people are in different stages, let's say, of transition. And, it's a sensitive topic for them because they're becoming who they truly feel that they are. And like just doing something so small can help someone a lot. It doesn't take a lot of energy to be nice. It doesn't take a lot of energy to help affirm someone. And I don't know how it feels to be transgender because I'm not. But if I can help someone to be more honest with of who they are, um, what does it hurt me to do that? And
Mhm.
helping people is something I really am very passionate about. And if I can do something as little as using the correct pronouns with someone, I think that that's worth the mental energy, the milliseconds that takes to do that. And
Yeah.
I also think that like if you accidentally say the wrong one and someone says, "Well, I'm actually whatever," oh, okay, sorry about that. I'll and then use the right pronouns. I do it myself at times, and I apologize. Like I have coworkers who are non-binary, and for me that was a very different concept. And I've had to work on that using they and them pronouns.
Mhm.
But it doesn't hurt me to do that. And like if that affirms who they are, it shouldn't be even a question in decent human minds. Like it's just a word. Um,
Yeah. I always say it takes them, like you just said, a millisecond of mental energy to use the correct pronouns. But the validation of that and the affirmation of that, no pun intended, could last someone's entire day. It can just really leave an impact of you just showing a brief second of kindness and acceptance. So,
right.
um,
I mean, how good does it feel when someone says, "Oh, I really like your outfit or your hair"?
mhm,
Think about how much more it would affect them if you're helping to affirm who they are,
yeah,
especially if it's something that is new to them, or even if it's not, like you're still affirming them as a human being.
a human being, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings and show
Exactly.
kindness and respect. Um, so I wanted to get in some kind of additional educational questions, and some might sound very rhetorical to individuals, but I'm taking this as big of an educational opportunity as we can. But how can I tell if someone is LGBTQ plus?
um, you may not be able to. Um, it's and in all honesty, it shouldn't matter
Yeah.
in the way that we treat people. We should treat everyone with respect and dignity, no matter if they are LGBTQ plus or not. But how do you tell is a very good question. A lot of times you wouldn't necessarily know until someone outs themselves to you. Um, I take the approach of if someone is presenting in a certain way, I will address them in that way. So if someone is, and this can be complicated when it comes to like non-binary uh, or non-gender conforming types of presentations. But I think in general, if you just try to respect people as humans and treat everyone with love and kindness, it won't really matter. But LGBTQ plus people are everywhere. We always have been. And I think that you don't always know. And a lot of times people don't necessarily know that I'm a gay man until I say my husband or something along those lines. Um, so just be aware that people are all around you and you have no idea. And this goes further than the LGBTQ question. You have no idea what someone's going through. And again, it goes back to it doesn't take anything to be nice. Just be a decent human being to everyone around you, and you're not going to have to worry about being a jerk.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off of that is if you're sharing a space, someone in your life, a coworker or anyone in your common area is either possibly questioning their sexual orientation or gender identity, what are some do's and don'ts as how to be a good ally or supporter or friend?
I think in general, it's kind of what I was just talking about, being a
Mhm.
decent human being to everyone. But definitely, if you would feel uncomfortable somebody asking you a question, especially when it comes to intimate details of your sexuality or your body, if you would feel uncomfortable with that, then I don't see how that could be okay for you to ask other people.
Mhm.
If you go around asking people about their genitalia on a regular basis, well, okay, fine. But I highly doubt that most people here are asking their coworkers about their genitalia because I think that that's called sexual harassment or something along those lines.
HR will definitely need to get involved.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would never ask a random person on the street about their sex life. It's very odd to me that that seems to be okay for people, and I understand that on from the outside looking in, you may think that the community is all about sex because it's about our sexuality, but that is not the case at all. We do tend to identify about that, but it's not about sex. It's about who we are attracted to. And just because you have attraction to someone doesn't mean you're going to have sex with that person. I mean, you could be attracted to people on the street, but you're not just going to go and hump their leg. Um, that's just not how it works. So I think that just being conscious that you don't ask people things about their genitalia or their sex life in general. So it's not appropriate to ask someone who happens to be LGBTQ as well. If you wouldn't ask your mother, then don't ask, or father, then don't ask an LGBTQ person.
Yeah. And
How's
I
that
think it's
for a rule?
also, yeah, I think it's also important that if you think someone is questioning either their sexual orientation or gender identity, is let them go on that journey and not push them forward or discuss it in a place where they are not ready to discuss it, and let them have their own journey and let them come to, their own comfortability with it.
I think there's another way that you can be an ally in those situations is that if you think that someone is questioning something, you can always make sure that they're aware that it's not a problem for you. I've advised people around me sometimes to say, like, if you think somebody is questioning their sexuality or their gender identity, you can always bring up a friend who, let's say you're talking about a male friend, Joe. You can say, oh, my friend Joe and his husband
Mm-hmm.
are blah, 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 because that indicates that you are okay with someone's being in a same-sex relationship. The same with gender identity. Um, you know, just be aware that there are ways that you can be an ally without pushing people.
Yeah.
Um,
And kind of off of that is the pronoun conversation of by you identifying your pronouns, it creates a open space and an area for people to feel comfortable to do that on their own if they so choose to, and walk into that space. So
that's a good point.
yeah.
And,
So, oh, sorry.
and that's why we should be like getting in the habit of saying, "Hey, I'm Jeremy. I use he and him pronouns." It gives that the other person the indicator that you're okay with that.
Yeah.
And
So we've said gender identity and sexual orientation, and I didn't know if you wanted to talk more about what's the difference between that. What are those two things, and anything kind of off of that conversation?
yeah, so sexuality is basically, in simplistic terms, it's who you're attracted to, um, in a sometimes sexual way. Um, you know, I think that people get confused because gender identity is more about who you are as a person. Um, and I think we're seeing a lot of younger people, not just on younger people, but coming out as non-binary, because our culture is so focused on gender, being a male or a female. And I think that a lot of times it doesn't even matter if you're in the LGBT community. Like, gender is something that we impose on people as opposed to allowing them to just be who they are. I was a very, very flamboyant little boy, and that is perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
However, in my upbringing, that was not okay. So the gender roles were really forced onto me, and even now in my 40s, I still have some problems with who I am at times because of the fact that that was forced on me as a child. And I think that a lot of the backlash against the community is because of the fact that we're bucking the gender roles. The fact that I have long hair or wear makeup or wear nail polish. I don't understand why, but it seems to upset people because they are very, very solid in their desire for people to be in a role as either a man or a woman. And it's ridiculous because it's the same as like telling boys not to cry. Like, crying is a human emotion, and your body needs to cry sometimes.
Yeah.
And just because you have a certain genitalia doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to cry.
No.
But our society over the centuries has really forced us into these boxes, and I
Yeah.
think they're ridiculous boxes. Why
Yeah.
should men not be caring and kind, and why should women not be strong and powerful? It's ridiculous. Like,
Exactly.
it's so silly.
Yeah. I think people tend to, you know, forget that things as such as nail polish or clothes or books or sports having saying one is more female, one male is completely made up by our social construct and it's society itself. And um, women liking, pink opposed to blue is just completely a societal push on that. And I think that forcing people into those two boxes is very just limiting to the human capacity of ourselves and everything. I just think it's, all of the pink razors or pink pens or whatever that I've been, women only are just ridiculous, but that
Yes.
goes on to, a lot of different things. So
Yes, I could go on about that for a very long
yeah,
time because it drives me crazy.
yeah. And there's like this toolbox that I got when I was younger for when I was going away to college. My dad gave it to me and it was like pink and everything. And I was like, what? Could my dainty lady hands not handle a black hammer? So, it's like, thank you, Dad. I appreciate it though.
I
Um,
mean, at least they got you a toolbox.
I know, yeah, yeah. Um, so kind of with a couple of questions left, and we've talked about it, but to wrap it up a little bit, um, how can I or anyone else watching here be the best ally they can be to the LGBTQ plus community?
Um, there are many, many ways, and I think that we've talked about a lot of them.
Yeah.
Just being a decent human being. I keep going back to it because it's so simple to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if and I'm not a Christian, but do unto others as you want them to do unto you. I mean, it's a very, very simple concept. If you don't want someone calling you dirty names or nasty names, then don't do it to them. Um, it's it's a very simple and easy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, be conscious of how other people are and how they're feeling, and be kind and gentle to them about that. Um, you know, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that you have to be rude or mean. Um, again, I can never understand how it is to be a transgender individual because I'm not a transgender individual. However, I can understand what it's like to be a human and how people treating me with disrespect could be extremely harmful to myself, my mental health, my physical health. Like, I mean, I think it's very basic. Don't hurt other people, like violence and physical hurting.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that, like, try not to hurt people mentally is also
Yeah.
something like, again, it doesn't cost you anything to be nice and not be a
Yeah.
jerk. Um, I think also voting.
Yep.
Now, I'm from a nonprofit organization, but so I can't say to vote for certain people, but voting is extremely important. And if you don't vote, you really don't have a say in how the country and the local government is behaving. Um, I think it's extremely important to vote. Um, I also think, like, know who you're voting for. Uh, I Every time there's an election, I may not be like the most politically active person in general, but I spend time looking up everyone on my ballot. I
Mm-hmm.
think that it's very important, um, to know who you're voting for and what they believe in.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
but
think the last 2 years have really shown you, um, us and everybody, how important it is to be involved in local elections as well, from school board to city council to state legislatures. Specifically, some of the very alarming things that are coming out of Texas and other states penalizing and making it a crime for gender confirming and affirming treatment and medical treatment. So I think it's important to even get to the state legislatures and know who is representing you at every level, and understanding what they stand for, um, because it is heartbreaking to see the stories coming out of Texas and other, I think Florida as well, just how the lengths that people will go to just not be kind to another individual is incredibly disheartening.
it's baffling that people who have no concept of what medical procedures are, um, or what they do for people. I mean, you would never try to pass laws about helping people get liver transplants.
Hmm.
Like, a lot of times, gender reassignment surgery is life saving.
Yes.
Um, there are, and I know this is supposed to be about pride, and like pride isn't celebration, but we also have to remember that, like, people who are going through some of these things, like we have higher rates of suicide in the LGBT community. It's really difficult to go against the society that you are raised in completely,
Yeah.
which in a lot of cases for me, like going against how I was raised in a very strict gender role, heterosexual system, like that's extremely challenging.
Yeah.
I went from having a community around me and loving and supporting me to having zero people in my corner.
Yeah.
And you can't imagine how tempting it can be to not want to continue. And I
Yeah.
think that these types of things, banning surgeries that help people, it's silly. You again, you are not going to ban liver transplants. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense.
And yeah, and the number, the rates and of suicide and violence against Black trans women of color, or any, yeah, trans women of color, is alarming and should be on the forefront of everyone's mind. We want to be, talking about creating a celebratory space and whatnot, is being very transparent that those are very alarming numbers and very scary places that we have created. And it's
And
that's why we have pride and celebrating and whatnot. But yeah, not to go down a very sad path, but yeah.
right. But and beyond that,
Yeah.
like not just the violence towards them, but discrimination.
Yep.
I mean, we in Michigan don't have rights that protect us against discrimination based on our sexuality or our gender identity. Like that's just a basic thing that people as allies could work towards. Um, I mean, I remember when I was younger and we would travel places, my partner and I would travel places, and I would always check to make sure that where we were staying was okay with us being in the same room together. Like, I don't know of any straight people having to look up hotels to make sure that, like, if you're going to a small town, is it okay to be staying in the same room with your partner? Like, that's a basic thing that people shouldn't have to worry about. And it may seem odd to say, but we still are discriminated against. Um, and it's completely legal in Michigan in some certain circumstances.
Yeah, well, this was kind of going into the last question. I can kind of put them together of um, how can we step up spaces and be an ally to trans people, as well as how can Michigan, or what are the spaces that Michigan still needs to improve to not, reach full quality, but, just creating a space that Michigan celebrates and protects LGBTQ plus individuals.
I mean, on a local individual level, like if you have a business, something as simple as putting a rainbow sticker in your window.
Yeah.
It's just an indicator that like you're okay here.
Yeah.
Something that simple can be very helpful. Something as simple as putting your pronouns on your website next to your names. Um, those things can indicate, hey, I'm an ally. As far as the stuff in Michigan, like we need to be fighting for expansion of the Elliott Larson. Um, it's very simple, and I think that anyone who wants to be an ally could also, like, another step would be to call your congressperson or your senator and say, like, I'm very concerned that people can be discriminated in employment, housing, and public accommodation just because they happen to be um, of a different sexual orientation or gender identity than I am. And that's something that anyone can do. It takes a phone call, an email, um, because how are politicians going to know what the people want? And they're supposed to be representing us if we don't tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to your representatives. That's another great way to do it.
Yeah. And on the conversation of having allies elected into office, Attorney General Dana Nessel, I recently saw her argue in front of the Michigan Supreme Court the expansion of the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act to include that sexual orientation inherently is already in that act. So I don't know where it is with opinions coming out yet, but I was able to sit in the audience and see her and her team argue on it. And it was a really great space to be able to see someone at that level arguing on behalf of LGBTQ plus individuals. And I think that was very moving and a monumentous kind of thing that happened. So,
well, and this also, because it's going to the Michigan Supreme Court, don't forget when you're voting that you also need to know who the Supreme Court justices are that you're voting for, since we have to elect them.
Yep. Like, they are not appointed like they are at the federal level. They are elected.
Do your research.
Yeah. Take a minute, everybody. Just Google something.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I think those are all the questions that I have prepared for, our conversation. I don't know if you have any closing remarks or anything that I think maybe I missed or that is essential to this educational opportunity.
I think that this has been great. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm just going to say it again. It doesn't take a lot of energy to be a decent human being and be kind. That's my closing statement. Just be
awesome.
nice.
Yeah. Just be kind.
Yeah.
Yes. Don't let hate win. All right. Well, thank you so much to you, Jeremy, and for Affirmations for joining us today. I think we had a great conversation. I'm really, really happy to, bring forth these questions in a very comfortable space. So thank you guys for joining us. And I hope everyone has a good rest of their Friday.
All right. You too.